And we're back. You're making me laugh already. Hi, welcome, Eric.
Hi, welcome. I'm sorry, that was unprofessional of me, wasn't it? But I'm not going to apologize because we're
No,
here to talk about being unapologetically us.
right? So, welcome to the stage, so to speak. I am so excited that you agreed to be a part of this. I always enjoy talking with you. I think that we could probably sit and talk for hours about all kinds of things. I always leave with valuable information and I always leave feeling better every time I
Oh,
interact with you. So, thank you for showing up and being who you are. And speaking of being who you are, can you tell viewers, listeners, wherever you're finding this interview, will you tell them what you do in the world, how you show up?
I love that question because I always feel like it should be a package. Like, there's a six pack and, two of them are vanilla, and two of them are chocolate, and one of them swirl.
Hmm.
But I always feel like when I say I'm always changing, it's not out of uncertainty, but I'm always trying to figure out more of who I am. And
Hmm.
so what I'm beginning to figure out more and more is that the M that I am isn't as big as I needed it to be effective.
Oh.
Like I used to think I had to like stand up on this, like, and I had to be big to
Hmm.
be significant. And I'm figuring out that I'm just me, just Eric. I work with people. I love words. I love the power of words. I love manipulating words to create impact. So that's what I am. I'm a word man.
You're a wordsmith.
Oh, see, you just elevated me.
Ah. So you help people use words how? What does that look like?
As a coach, often I'll hear somebody use a word that I think shackles them, like, oh, I can't do that. And I'm like, can't. That wasn't want or won't. That wasn't shouldn't. That was can't. That means you don't believe that it's a possibility. And I'll spend more time on the can't than the thing that we talked about.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I say that wordsmithing, it applies to coaching or when I'm working with writers. I often say that I'm the writer's coach, and I'll see that they put something in a sentence. I'm like, you realize by using the word but, you just negated the conversation that happened before. Or when you said also, you didn't balance the also against something else. So it's like a one-sided teeter-totter, and now the reader's going to be open looped. And so when I work with writers, we'll spend time in that. And the same thing with marketing. We were talking beforehand how if we can shift the word, we attract a different client.
Mm-hmm.
And that client is the one that we've been seeking, but it's also the client on the other side begins to self-identify that that's the solution that they've been hungry for.
I like
So
it.
that's what I do with words all day long.
I love it.
That and
I
I
love
yell at
it.
my kids with the same ones.
Perfect. Well, I'm going to ask you the same question that I've asked everyone inside of this interview series, and that is, what does it mean for you to show up and be unapologetically you?
You told me that, and I thought, what does it mean? And I couldn't understand. So, what does it feel like?
Hmm.
Is maybe how I want to restructure it if I can.
That's fine. You can make it lean into it however you want to.
So, what it feels like to me is when I show up unapologetically, it's very freeing because I'm not looking at other people's face for a reaction if I'm enough.
Hmm.
I'm not listening to the demons of my mother and my father and my school teachers and the past bosses, employees. Like, I'm not listening for them out of fear that they're going to jump out and go, oh, you can't be that. You're not smart enough, big enough, fast enough, tall enough, rich enough, young enough. I just like, it's so freeing because I just walk into a space and it's like, hey, this is what I got. Nobody said you had to buy it. Nobody said you had to stick around and listen to it. Nobody said you even have to like it.
Hmm.
But I'm not going to change it to coerce you into an agreement with me when it's not really me.
Mm,
And so for me to show up unapologetic is really, in a sense, to not give a damn, if we're
hmm.
allowed to use that word.
Absolutely.
You know, I think we spend a lot of our life thinking there's this big permanent record. And I, like you, grew up in the Midwest in a Lutheran home where, you know, the book is open and they're going to read it on Judgment Day.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that book, that's a whole different story. But to walk through life believing people are keeping a book on you and that they're going to judge you,
Mm-hmm.
like, I remember being in school and teachers saying, that's going to go in your permanent record. I'm still looking for that damn permanent record. So I decided long ago, nobody really kept the permanent record. So I was going to stop worrying about it.
Mm-hmm. And just show up. That's a big reason why I asked you to be part of this, is because I see you showing up and just being you and embracing all of the amazing gifts that you have, and the fun parts too, the quirkiness, the your sense of humor, how you see humor in things that maybe other people don't initially, but then before you know it, the whole room is laughing. Like you just have a way about you that is truly unique to who you are. And I've watched you inspire countless people and encourage countless people and raise you elevate the room that you're in. And so I've got to ask, what was your journey? What's been your journey to get to this point? Because I know, I mean, you and I have talked offline. I know that maybe you didn't always feel like it was okay to show up and really just be
Oh,
you.
Lord. No. Uh, I'll just wipe the tears before we start. So without the full backstory, but sort of I grew up in a home of a German Lutheran mechanical engineer. So anybody that doesn't know what that looks like, let's just say, sum it up with, it wasn't uncommon to hear an expression like, hush up, you're having too much fun in there. Like my father, my stepfather who raised us, grew up in Germany during the occupation, the Nazi occupation. His father was deployed to the Russian front. So everything he did was built around survival and silence. Stay silent, get through. And so as kids, we were taught, work hard, stay silent, get through. Show up with the right face, show up with the right attitude, work your way to success. My father worked at the same company probably for 40 years. Like he started and retired and got his gold watch. And that was him. And so because I love him and I admired him, I said, that's what a man is. That's what a father is. That's what a responsible person is. You show up, you shut up, and you get the work done. And I heard somebody once tell me, Eric, why is fun always the last thing on your list? I was like, because it should be. Like, don't you know better? And so for me to be authentically me was to break all of that rule. To say, you know what, Dad, that helped you survive the occupation, but it's crushing me. And we're conditioned as infants to not go against those people who feed us because we'd starve to death in our cribs. So we join into the agreement. And because of the fact that he was my stepfather and my mother had been a single mother for a number of years, and my mother didn't really say it, but it was really clear that we're lucky he picked us, because a single woman with 3 kids, he had other options. Now, they loved each other and all of that, but you know, so it was always like, shut up, show up, do the work. And it crushed it. I mean, it crushed me, but I still wouldn't give in because I didn't want to disappoint the people that had raised me. No matter how broken and beaten and tired it felt, I was still doing the right thing because I watched my father endure and I loved and respected him. So I thought I had to endure. I mean, I didn't think anybody out there really felt happy or joyful or worthy of joy, because that's just not like what we do. That's not what Midwesterners do. And I say that somewhat jokingly, but anybody that grows up in the Midwest knows that our emotions aren't always on the surface.
Right.
And
Suck it
so,
up, work harder.
yeah. And so I really had I wasn't a moment, like it didn't just hit me. It was slowly realizing that when I jumped out of that role in that expectation and I survived, and then I'd be pulled back in, that it was like, oh, wait a minute. It worked for a minute. Let's try 2 minutes. Let's try 3 minutes. Let's try a week. Let's try moving away from home for a season. That it was more in that process of like, I can swim on my own, that I began to shred different layers of the person that I had built up. I remember once saying that, well, I can't, my little sisters are still in school. Like, I can't be who I want to be because my sisters are still in the school that I graduated from, and we live in a small town. And, so I was always looking towards other people to figure out how I should show up. That until I really got physically away from them, that I felt that I could be more me. And the funny thing was, as I was packing, I know this is a long story. Sorry, you guys.
This is good.
As I was packing to leave Minnesota and head to head to North Carolina, my mother said, no matter where you go, you're there. And I was like, duh. Like, yeah, like that's like one of the dumbest things I've ever heard. No matter where you go, you're there. That's like saying a circle is always round. Like, duh, mom. And then I started to, like, as I matured, realizing what she was trying to tell me is, if you're not happy with you here, you're just going to be unhappy with you there.
Right.
So don't think the physical distance is going to free you from what you're feeling.
Right.
Because if you can't get freedom here, you're not going to get freedom there. If you can't be authentically you here, you can't be authentically you there. And so now, all right, mom, you were right. No matter where you go, you're there. And I'll probably tell my kid the same thing as he heads off to college, and he'll roll his eyes and go, duh.
Right. So as you stepped away physically stepped away from your home and that environment, what prompted you to really step into being true to who you are? Because a lot of people don't. They just continue to run on autopilot and do the same things that they were taught and that they had to do to assimilate into their family. Instead of taking the path of authenticity, they just stay assimilated and they just keep producing the same results. So what was your tipping point?
I think there were a couple things, but I think it was because when I left, I didn't necessarily leave on the high note. It wasn't like graduating college and going and getting a career at a big corporation. It was really almost fleeing for survival. So when I got there, I didn't have a huge backstory that I had to carry with me going into a company or into a community. I didn't really have a plan except just to go. And so in that process, people didn't know my story or my history or my background. And until I told them, they assumed anything they wanted. And so why not let them assume something completely different than maybe what I had been leading people to assume in the previous. So really showing up without an agenda of what I wanted. And then shortly after being there, crashing and burning, so to speak, like really having to like have lawn chair furniture for a while, which is always so nice. It just wipes off.
Done that.
But not having an image to maintain. So since there was nothing to maintain, it sort of was like starting from ground zero. And then having an event that I was supposed to die within 2 years, but that's all like 30 years later. So having sort of that mortality signal, it's like, well, I remember when I got this like diagnosis, I'm such an idiot. I was like, well, if I'm going to die in like 2 years, like that was the long shot. Like if you make it through this year, you should be applauding. I went out and bought a new car with this 4-year payment plan because I figured I'm not going to be around when it's time to pay it off. I might as well enjoy this really nice car and get the payments as low as possible because I'll be dead in a year and somebody else will have the responsibility. My plans never work out the way I thought. Here I ended up having to pay for that car, and I'm now like 6 cars later. But I think it was in that too. It's like, well, if I'm going down me.
Yeah.
And in going down and not actually going all the way out, it was like, oh, well, now that you've run down the street naked, everybody pretty much knows who you are. So you might as well just stay out there anyhow,
Mhm.
and start building your life from who you are, not what you think you should be.
Hmm. It's interesting. Uh, I've known a lot of people that have come face to face with their mortality, and it's a big game changer. There's high emotion involved. Your beliefs kind of switch, because that you see everything differently immediately. But
But
the
how many
truth,
bought a car?
oh, that's funny. But the truth is, none of us know. So you're given a timestamp. You were given a timestamp, and that created urgency for you to really be true to who you were. But the truth of it is, none of us really know. I mean, almost a year ago exactly, my husband got sick suddenly, and this is a man that was fit and healthy and no pre-existing medical conditions, and all of a sudden he's on a ventilator, and I almost lost him. And so that brings you like some pretty instant clarity, but the truth of it is, none of us know what is going to happen. None of us know what's around the corner. And so why are we waiting, and what makes us just sit and exist and not take the risks, and not live full out?
Well, and I think there's a responsibility. So often when we all have that moment, it may not appear to be like a near death moment. It may just be, the crash and burn of the housing market, or the crashing burn of another situation. We often think that because we survived that, we have a built-in resiliency so we can get to living later, because obviously, we're supposed to be here forever. And so we sort of even put that moment of crisis, like we minimize it. It's like, no big deal. Like, you know what? We can do it over again. Like
Wow.
if I survive that, I can survive anything. So I don't need to rush. Um, and so
Huh.
when that happened, like I said, it was like, hey, I am where I am, and I'm alive, and I'm going to go for it, and I'm going to be me. And I didn't necessarily like completely expand. There were
Mm-hmm.
moments that when I traveled home to be with my family, or when I was moved into corporate America, I sort of fell back into those patterns,
Mm-hmm.
because they were the patterns of my safety. They were the patterns of
Right.
my security. I knew how to do that really, really good.
Mm-hmm.
And so when stress arose, I was like, do what you know best. Shut up, put your head down, get the work done.
Mm-hmm.
Over time and getting old, I think I'm like, yeah, but do I have the energy to put on that outfit, to put on that wardrobe, to go back into dress rehearsal?
Mm-hmm.
They talk about actors, some are method actors and some are character actors. And I think for a large part of my life, I lived as a method actor. I would study the role that I was supposed to play, and then I would become that thing. Whereas as a character actor, you're always yourself, and the roles around you or the scripts that you're handing feed into that individual. So I feel like I'm moving more and more towards that, as being just who I am, and life will show up to match who I am versus me showing up to
Mm-hmm.
match life.
I love that. How do you stay present and aware? Like, how do you prevent yourself from going back to, autopilot? Like, I mean, you specifically, like, what are things that you do to keep showing up true to who you are, instead of, sliding back into old patterns?
I step off the Zoom and go into my life. The other morning, I mean, all right, authentic. So the other morning, I'm in my daughter's room. She's 10. I'm helping her get dressed for school. She has some disabilities. And I'm like, what stinks in here? So I go through her laundry basket, and there's a couple pair of underwear that she hasn't quite finished wiping her butt. I'm like, really? I've got like 3 Zoom calls and 2 coaching clients today, and I'm going to spend part of my day in the laundry room dealing with this.
Right.
Like, and She above all, I remember when she was probably 4 or 5 months old, and I had my suit and tie on. And I was like, okay, I was like, honey, can you bring Eva down? I'm like, sure, no problem. I jump in her bedroom, grab her, figure I'll just grab her, the diaper bag, and head down the steps and out the door. Well, there was this thing called a diaper genie, which puts diapers in a big long sausage tube. The bottom fell out. So diapers are now bouncing down the step. Poop is bouncing off the wall. I was in a hurry when I grabbed her. Apparently, she needed to spit up. And so now there's like this. And there's diaper poop, and my shoes were shiny. And I'm like, really? Is this my life? And I'm like, yeah, this is your life. As much as you wanted it to look like, guess what? This is your reality. So deal with it. And so yes, I was able to like get this. I got the stain off, but not the smell. So the rest of the day you're walking around going,
Right.
something smells like sour milk, and you're like, not me. I'm in a suit and tie. Couldn't be me. But I think when we stop trying and we like, yep, this is my life. I clean up poopy diapers and stinky underwear, and I burn dinner. And as much as I would want it to look another way, that would mean I'd have to give up my daughter. And so, what do you really want? Do you want the image, or do you want the reality? Even the stinky, poopy, smelly parts of the reality, I don't want them. But if it's the price for having it all, okay.
Right. I like that. It's interesting. Last night I went into the bathroom to get ready for bed, and the kids were in bed. And it's I think it's more of a challenge to have teens go to bed than it is like when they're younger and they keep getting up over and over again. Like now, they just press my buttons just to press my buttons. And my husband's been gone this weekend, so now that I'll like just get into bed and then they'll call me. What are you doing, Mom? Go to sleep, or they'll text me, good night, I'm not sleeping yet, but I will. It's just crazy, and it's all in fun. But I walk into the bathroom, and my son has this habit of when he takes his jeans off, they're inside out, and then they stay that way until you go to do laundry, and then like you're irritated, and so then if you put him back in his room, then he shoves him under the bed, and then not until he either cleans his room or that runs out of clothes to wear do they come out. But then it's all, inevitably Tom or I end up flipping them right way around. So I got him out of bed last night and said, "You've got to flip these jeans around. I'm done. I can't." And I'm sitting there and I'm watching him, and he's like stomping around and acting mad, but he also smirking because he just knows. And I was what started off as irritation on my part. I was like, wait a minute. I'm so fortunate. First of all, like we have this relationship where we can joke around with each other, and he knows I'm giving him a hard time, but he can be smirky about it, and we love each other. And I have a child that I can pick up his jeans because in a few years he's going to be gone. And it's just like for me reframing that, and it's not like silver lining or toxic positivity, but for me that keeps me up here at a high level. It keeps me above the line. It keeps me
Amen.
focused on what's really important, and
Well, my son does. Oh, his socks are everywhere. Like I swear, it's not an exaggeration. I could open the refrigerator and one of his socks would be somewhere in it. They're like always flying off his feet, and I'm always bitching about it. I'm like, nobody wants to touch your socks,
right.
and nobody wants to touch them in the kitchen. And so one day I was on one of my dad rages, and I was yelling at him, and he stops and goes, I said, why do you do this? Like, why do you do this? It's not that complicated. Socks, feet, laundry basket. He said, well, how else would you know I'm still here?
Aww.
And it was like, I wasn't like, he's clever.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And I laughed and I said, well, there will be a day that you can come and drop a few off. But in the meantime,
Right. Right.
but as much as I would like people to walk into our house and just be able to enter it and think it's this pristine chapel of coaching civility and my children are perfect, they will look and go, there's the sock. And I will be like, yep, I tried. I really tried to put my best foot forward, but life got in the way.
And it should get in the way, Eric. Like this, let's just, I mean, if we're seriously talking about being real and being authentic and just being unapologetically you, I don't care who you are. Everybody has socks. Like we all have things that get in the way. We all have things that are imperfect. And I think it's just about time that we just show up as
W-
ourselves and stop pretending.
As you repeated it back, I think that's interesting that we both adopted "get in the way," but we never asked "in the way of what."
The picture in our
Because
head, for me, it's like the picture in my head of how
yeah,
it should be. But
yeah,
but
life
that
is
doesn't
getting in the
exist.
way of the false us.
So, okay. So,
I love that. Thank you. I'm write that
write that
down, Sandy.
down.
Life is
It's
getting in the way of the false me that I'm trying to build.
right. Instead of, yeah. Yeah, that's like, I'll just stop.
like
I don't
duh.
think we can get better than that. Yeah, that's that. So true. Well, okay. I heard somebody say it this way, and this might be crass for some people, but it's like life porn. We have this picture of like how it should be. It's not that way. Just like porn isn't
Mhm.
that way, right? Like it's not that way in real life. And we're sold this bill of goods, but and I don't even know where. I mean, society obviously feeds into that. But this idea of having things perfect, or your teens being well behaved, or that your house is pristine all the time, like that's just crap. And we're sold this bill of goods, and then we're living up to this expectation that doesn't even exist, and it can just
Amen.
mess with you, like completely mess with you. So I love the real.
The other night was posting on Facebook how my son has grown and how I really wish those days hadn't gone by. So like this big romantic thought. And about the minute I hit post, I heard it fighting in the other room between the two of them. And I'm like, could you do? And I started screaming in the rage. And I was like, well, that was a good moment. Like, well, that went by pretty quick. Um, and then I thought, well, duh. Like, you can't suspend life in this one
Right,
moment
right,
and consider it worth living.
right. Absolutely. And when my family and I, when we traveled around the US in the motorhome, I mean, it wasn't rainbows and butterflies. In fact, after the trip was over, I'm like talking to Tom one night and I'm like, are they going to remember all the crap of it? Or are they going to remember the fun? Because there was a lot, there was tension, and there was hard times, and being together, and things not working out as planned, and not even that anybody had a snit about it. It's just that disappointment or the uncertainty of not knowing where you're going. And so I sat down with the kids and I'm like, talk to me about our time in the motorhome. Like, do you regret it? Do you wish that we wouldn't have done it? And tell me what your memories are, good or bad. Doesn't matter. There's no judgment. And both of them said no regrets. And when I asked them about memories, their top memories were happy and good. Not that they don't remember the bad
But I
too,
think that
but
goes to because in our youth, we don't hold the expectations of others in such high regard.
mm,
Like as we get older, I think we start to worry about what our boss says, what our girlfriends say, like we start to calibrate ourselves against other people. Whereas when I look at my kids and I'll like try and use that as leverage against my kids, I'm like, well, what would your friend David do? And my son would be like, I don't know, who cares? Like, shoot, that didn't work. I'm trying to inflict other people's value about what you're doing right now, and you're just brushing it off because you have an 11-year-old's mindset of like, I don't care what other people think of me and my socks.
right. But don't you think
So
that comes from you instilling in them a sense of their worth too? Because I was always worried about other people
I think
growing
there's a
up.
pivot point when we probably somewhere between 11 and 16
Hmm.
that we start to become, and psychologists and
Okay,
child
right, right.
therapists will say,
So,
socially aware.
so you're talking before that pivot point where kids are not aware.
Well, and I'm trying to temper my son into it now we had a conversation the other day about news versus commentary. and how news is based on fact and commentary is opinion. And then we talked about how commentary shouldn't be valued equal to news. And I said, so you'll see that in relationship to world events,
Mm-hmm.
but it's also the same thing about you. There are facts about you that are facts. But because you're a brown-skinned kid does not mean you're more likely to drop out of high school. That's an opinion, that's a commentary.
Mm-hmm.
And so you don't have to listen to the commentaries, but you do have to acknowledge the facts and then make decisions based on them.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm sort of prepping him for that space when he's going to be surrounded by peers that are full of commentaries.
Mm-hmm.
And him being able to cut through and go, oh, well, that's just commentary. That's your
Yeah.
opinion. I don't need to absorb that as fact.
Yeah. So good.
Because I don't want him basing, because then it goes into truth and beliefs.
Right.
Like his truth is not based on your commentary.
Right.
Unless he chooses it to be.
Yes. And that's where the power lies, like, period, like forever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think we're conditioned as kids, or I wasn't. My parents weren't consciously saying, well, that's they might say, oh, sticks and stones are going to break your bones,
right.
blah, blah. But they never really helped me decipher
right.
what commentary versus fact,
yeah,
what internal versus external was.
Yes. Yeah, I love that. That's such a gift that you're giving your kids. I mean, just think how much more aware, further ahead, further grounded in who they are, what they want, that they have control over where they're going, etc. I mean, they're going to be based on your level of awareness. Like, I look at my relationship with my kids, and it's not perfect. So don't get me wrong here. I'm not trying to paint some magical, stupid picture about a perfect life, but my kids talk to me. They show me the texts they're having with girls or boys. They talk to me about things that I never would have talked to my parents about. Or like, ooh, my friend yelled at me in class today. I yelled back. I got in trouble. Or, oh my goodness, this girl reached out to me. I don't know what to say. What do you think I should say? How can I navigate this? And I know I just didn't have those conversations with my parents. And to be a safe space, I'm honored to be a safe space for my kids, where they can be like real about how they're feeling. I mean, my son had a really bad day at school yesterday. He literally yelled and cried in the car on the way home, and he felt safe enough to do that with me and know that it was going to be okay. And I just think most of us just long for that space that we can have with somebody where we can feel safe like that.
Well, and I think a part of that comes because your experience in the motorhome, they saw you and Tom fail. You'd get lost. You'd back into the wrong camper spot, and you wouldn't be able to turn the vehicle around.
Right.
Like, there were a million times you guys just look like idiots. And I don't mean that judgmentally. That they're like, okay, not a perfect human being. I grew up thinking my dad was perfect. I mean, there was a time, so he was putting up wallpaper once in our dining room, and it bubbled in the corner, like when you don't do wallpaper just right.
Yeah.
And it was the last like corner of the wallpaper of like this 10-foot wall. So my dad was going to take the whole wall down and start over because we couldn't survive with this little tiny bubble. My mother, on the other hand, grabbed a little like 3x5 picture frame and ran in and glued it to the wall where the bubble was, so she would have evidence that he wasn't perfect. And that sort of became like the step, like, you did screw up once. We have proof. It's right there. Look inside that picture. But to have to go to such a degree shows that I felt like failure was like, it doesn't exist in this home. When my kids and I traveled outside of the country for 3 years, and they would see me trying to use this combination of Spanish and sign language to order a hamburger, they were like, my dad's an idiot. Now, I think they have that same comfort that your kids do. Like, okay, that person's not perfect, so they'll totally understand. But I think it's our job as parents to, if nowhere else, show up as complete screw-ups so that our kids can feel like they can share their screw-ups with me.
Right, but I don't think that's normal. I don't think that's common. I think because when we grow up and then we don't question what we've been programmed, so to speak, or what, what, and then we just carry that on, then we're not real. We're not real. I mean, I thought growing up that I just couldn't wait to be an adult because then I'd have it figured out. I just thought my parents didn't tell me stuff because they were just so busy, like getting even more things figured out because they had so much figured out already that at some point I would just wake up and just have it figured out. And I longed to feel that sense of knowing that I was okay. And I didn't realize that that was inside of me the whole time, and I could have chosen that in that moment. And if I could give that gift, I mean, not only to my kids, but that's what I want for everyone. Because when you know that you're okay and that comes from within you, then you can show up that way too. And then you don't die with regrets. And then you don't die with, like what we were talking about before, with this big bucket list that's full of things you just didn't do because you were too afraid. And, it kind of brings us full circle back to showing up, unapologetically you. And when, when you're, when you're talking about your son and the socks and like, how else would you know I was here? I love that. Like, he's safe. He's safe with you. He can give you a hard time. He knows he doesn't have to be perfect. And I love that space for kids because they're going to grow up and automatically give that to others, because when you show up as yourself, then it gives other people permission to do the same.
It's interesting because I struggle as a dad, and I say that in the present future tense. I still want him to be the ideal of what I think it should be.
Mm-hmm.
Like sometimes in my mind, I still but he has to be courageous. He has to be West Point, like this model that we see, the chiseled, like I still think that if I can get him there, I've done a good job as a dad, which is really ironic because it's the complete opposite of what I want him to be like after he finishes that. Like get to that point and then go ahead and be you. But just let me know. And so I struggle sometimes with still trying to make sure that he turns out the way he's supposed to turn out in my image.
Mm-hmm.
And then he is the most compassionate. Like his love language is touch. And he is 11, he's 5'2", he's 130 pounds. He's a big kid and he'll still crawl up on your lap and want to talk. I'm like, son, I love you, but this is killing me. He has no problem if he's on the couch making sure he's in physical contact with somebody.
Aww.
And I look at that and I'm like, do I want to crush that because I think he's supposed to be something else? Mm. And so I constantly have to check myself. And I think as parents, I'll say it again, if we can't be authentic with our kids, we're crippling generations upon generations. And I'm still unpacking the stuff that my dad gave me. I understand why he did it. I understand his history. I understand that he didn't have something different. And it's my responsibility to understand why, but not to take it into my beingness. And so, yeah, I still sometimes wonder if I'm enough for my dad, my father. Mm-hmm. But I don't want to make sure, I don't want my kid to go to bed thinking, am I enough?
Right.
Because then he's going to chase some false expectation of what enough is.
Right.
So, yeah.
Well
so I'll be unapologetically authentic with him. The rest of you, I'll put a mask on.
Oh, Eric. So I don't believe it for a minute. I've never known you to be fake. So thank you for showing up and thank you for sharing your stories that are real and powerful. There's so many great nuggets and takeaways from this conversation. As we close here, Eric, how can people find you? What's the best place for them to connect with you?
All things social media, Eric G. Reid. So that's the Twitter, the Facebook, the LinkedIn, the Clubhouse, not the TikTok. I'm not cool enough for TikTok yet. I'm working on it. I may do something with my kid. And then Success Life U is the website.
Okay. Is it YOU or is it letter U?
Letter U.
Okay. Success Life U. Gotcha. Okay. Thank you so much for being here today. I appreciate you.
I loved hanging out with you in the little she shed.
It was awesome.